In this video, I'll demonstrate how to use the CreateDatabase statement, and while doing that, we'll take a little detour and talk about character sets and collation. Before we get started, recognize I'm in MySQL Workbench. I have all of my panes open, and right now, just to show you how, if you should forget how to use the CreateDatabase statement, remember we have this SQL additions pane and these snippets over here, and underneath these snippets you can choose DDL or DML, and by the way, DDL stands for data definition language, and these are the statements that are classified as DDL. Create table, create view, right? What we're going to do is right here create schema. All right, and so let's take a look at that. I'm going to right click and oops, I'm going to move my cursor first right there. Okay, now right click, I'm going to insert the snippet, and let's take a few minutes to figure out how to read this. This syntax is showing us all the options that are available in using this statement. Now this is a fairly short statement, and this is kind of easy to read. Sometimes you'll see some of these that become overwhelming, and then it's kind of hard to read them. So for instance, just to show you one that has a lot of options in it, if I do alter table, and now look at that, it just has so many options that sometimes it becomes kind of hard to read the all the things that I can do. But right now, let's just stick with CreateDatabase, and I'll delete this alter table one. That's for another video. So basically, right there tells you have to have the word create, and now we have to have one of these two words, and this pipe symbol means or. So I can either type CreateDatabase or I can type create schema, but you have to do one or the other. MySQL is a little bit unique in that they use the word schema and database interchangeably. These square brackets means optional. You don't have to type what's in here, but you can. So I can type if not exists, and then right here it's saying you need to put in a database name, and you have to type that. Notice I have square brackets here, meaning it's optional. I don't have to put in a create specification. So then the question is, well, what is a create specification? And so you come down here and go, oh, I can put in something about a character set and something about the collation. And notice it has this optional keyword default. You don't have to type it, you can. Do I have to type an equal sign? Nope. So under create specification, I could just type character set and then the character set name. Now, of course, in a few minutes, we'll talk about what all of that means. And also, don't forget, I don't have to do any of it because create specification is optional. So that's a quick overview of how you read one of these statements. So now let's actually do it. I'm going to comment out this statement right up here, and then we'll actually type one. And so what I mean by comment out is I don't want this to really run. Well, it wouldn't, right? Because it has all of this stuff in here that you need to fill in. So basically, if you put a slash and a star, that's the beginning of a block comment, and then you put star slash, and that's the end of a comment. So then when I come down here, I can start typing create space, and then I always use the word database. I don't use schema, but of course I could use either one. So there's create database, and then it's saying you have to give it a name. So in this example, just to have a scenario to work through, let's say you're starting a small business and you have employees, and so you want to keep track of your employees and your products and your orders, just like a typical business. So maybe we'll just call it my company. Give the database a name. That is all you need to do at this point. Remember when we read this up here, I need to type the word create, either database or schema, and then the name, and that's the only thing that's required. The square brackets means optional. So let's go ahead. I'm going to put a semicolon here, although you don't have to. It's a good habit to get into. I select that line and just hit run. Down here in my output, it says, yep, one row affected, a green check mark, everything worked. But you look over here under your schemas, under my navigator pane, and I don't see it. More often than not, you have to hit refresh. In fact, probably every time you have to hit refresh, and then all of a sudden my company shows up. Now, there's no tables in our database, right? A database without tables is really not a database, but at least we've created the container, and in a future video, we'll talk about how to create tables. Now watch what happens if I try to run this statement again. So I'll select it, or I could just put my cursor here and I'll choose this one. All of a sudden I get a red X down here under my output that says, whoa, it already exists. I can't create it anymore. So that's what this if not exists does for you. Basically, if you're writing a script, meaning I'm going to have several SQL commands in a row, if one of the commands gives you an error like this red X, database already exists, well, the script will quit running. What you can do is put if not exists inside of that. So now when I run this, rather than a red X, I'll get a yellow triangle, which basically says, all right, I'll keep going. I ran this, but not really, right? It says, because if not exists. Well, it does exist. So it'll just keep going at that point. In general, it's probably a good idea to throw in the if not exist statement in your CreateDatabase. And then you just don't run into these issues if a database does already exist. Now let's take a few-minute detour and talk about what is a character set and what is a collation. For my course, we will not mess with these very much, but I want you to be familiar with them, because when you research information or Google questions about MySQL, you may run into this and you just want to know what it's about and how it affects you. So before we talk about character sets, we probably should do a quick refresher on how a computer works. Remember, when you hit A on a keyboard, there's not like there's a bunch of little letters sitting inside your CPU and it says, oh, throw up an A. A CPU or your computer only has light switches. On, off, millions and millions of these little on-off light switches, right? So looking at this Excel spreadsheet, I have 8 light switches, and this is on, and when the black is down here, it's off, right? So 8 light switches we often call a byte, and you can assign a number to each of these if you don't want to get into binary math, but this light switch represents either 0 or 1, and then if this guy's on, we're at 2, 4, 8, right? So if all the light switches are on, that represents the number 255. If just this light switch is on and that light switch is on, that represents the number 65, okay? So how do I represent the letter A? Well, people got together and said, all right, if we want to display the letter A, we're going to make it the decimal number 65. So this configuration of light switches is on, we'll call that the letter A. So if you've ever seen an ASCII table, and it looks like this. Basically, they go through every, and in ASCII's English character, every English character, like A, and give it a decimal equivalent, 65, and that tells us when light switches are turned in a certain position, we'll display an A, right? Now, how about a small a? Oh, well, that's 97. So then that's going to be a different set of light switches, okay? So how does that affect character sets? Well, let's go to MySQL has a great documentation website. I'll put a link into this video. And in chapter 10, they talk about what is a character set. All right. So basically right here, it's very well worded. A character set is a set of symbols and encodings. All right. Then down here, suppose we have an alphabet with 4 letters. We give each letter a number. All right. The letter A is a symbol, the number is 0. So meaning the computer can only display these light switches, which are a numeric number. Let's just all agree on what that number is for representing the letter A. Now, of course, why do we have different character sets? Because people all over the world want to store their data in a database, and they use different languages with different symbols. So whether in Japan or China or Arabic symbols, Greek symbols, they may all use different character sets in which they have an agreement on what is the number that represents their character. So that's it. That's what a character set is. Just kind of it's choosing the character set that's going to represent the letters and symbols that our computer is using. The next question is, well, what is collation? So that gets down into this paragraph. I want to compare 2 strings, A versus B. Well, of course, they're just going to compare the numbers used in the encodings for those strings, okay? So if 0 for A and 1 for B, then you can say that A is less than B. Kind of makes sense, right? But what if I want to say, treat the lowercase a and b as equivalent to the uppercase A and B, right? So A is A. I don't care if it's capital A or small a. Well, remember, those two letters are going to have different numerical values. And so if that's what we want, then we have to tell it to be, we want to do a case-insensitive collation so that when we sort things, capital A and small a things stick together. So, and you can choose what your collation is, whether you want it to be case-insensitive or not. Now remember, at the beginning of this video I had said I want you to understand what a character set is in a collation, but we're not really going to mess with them in here. And the reason is when you set up MySQL, it has a default character set and collation that it comes with, and that's perfectly fine, so I don't ever need to change this. But if you wanted to, you could, after you write your CreateDatabase statement, you continue on with character set equal and collation equal. Well, how do you find those values? Well, obviously you could Google it, but also don't forget under information schema, we have metadata. And right at the very tippy top up here is one called character sets. So I'll select those rows and it will list all the different character sets available and what the default collation is. Okay, so the one that is defaulted on our system right now is UTF, Unicode, which is a UTF-8. It's a 2-byte encoding system. I might be wrong on that, but anyway, it's the most common one right there. Also, notice there's a table here called collations and character sets, right? So you can choose. So let's go down to UTF-8 here. So you can choose that character set. Well, they have all these different ways to collate that information, right? And what CI stands for is case insensitive. Occasionally you may see one that's CS, which is case sensitive, meaning the capital A is going to sort before a lowercase a. And as long as we're in information schema, I'll show you one other thing. There's a table of tables, right? This is the metadata we've talked about. I can select the top 1,000 rows off that. And one of the things it will show you are all the databases and the character set they've been created in. Now notice I have one that's Latin 1, and I suspect the script I used to populate that database must have specified the character set, because everything else is UTF-8 and the collation is general CI. One more thing I'll show you is there's a couple show commands that will tell you what your default is. Show commands are unique to MySQL, but it's just a way to look at the metadata of your databases. And so if I run this guy, what it's going to show is all sorts of information about character sets, and a character set on my server, the default one is UTF-8 right there. It shows where the directory is. If I run this one, again, the collation is UTF-8 general, and that's why when we looked at the schemata, all the databases, that's what they seem to have been, UTF-8 and with that kind of collation. And notice the CI, case insensitive. So now, if I cared about character sets and I wanted it to be a specific kind of character set and specific collation, when I create my database right here, I can put in a create specification, character set equal, and just to be different, I made it Latin 1 instead of UTF-8. And what collation do I want? Well, maybe I want mine to be case sensitive, not case insensitive, right? So a capital A is different than a small a, or a capital B is different than a small b, in which case I'm going to set my collation equal to Latin 1 general. Now, do I need the equal symbol? Nope. According to these square brackets, I don't have to type those, or I could choose to type them, right? That's what square brackets means. It's optional. And in fact, this entire specification is optional. Maybe I'll, just for fun, put my company 1 on this and run it, see what we get. So I got it. Now, if I run back to the schemata thing and rerun it, right here, all of a sudden my company 1 is sitting here with a Latin 1 character set and the general case sensitive collation. As I mentioned before, all I want you to know for my course is what these are. What does it mean? What is a character set and what is a collation? We probably won't type this very often, if at all. but I want you to be familiar with it because when you Google and look out on the internet, you're going to come across it. You'll see people's scripts where these are specified. Now, the last thing I want to show you is we've been creating a database by typing the SQL commands, because that's the goal of this course, is to learn these commands. But recognize in my SQL Workbench there is a GUI interface for doing just this. So if you click on this button right here, create a new schema, and don't forget schema and database mean the same thing, it comes up with this and goes, okay, what do you want to call it? So I'll call this one My Company 3. We'll make 3 databases. And whoops, there's that collation. So it's choosing server default, which is probably fine. But if you wanted to be different, right? So these are, let's go to UTF-8. So here we are, there is the character set, and these are all the different collations. Well, the one that's defaulted on our system, if I can find it here, is this, oops, I lost it. UTF-8 General CI. That's what we're already at. So if we just leave it at server default, that's the one that's going to choose. So if you click on that and hit apply, it says, because I put in capital M's and C's. Oh, that's interesting. So our server is configured with lowercase table names equal 1. And which only allows lowercase characters and schema and table names. That's good to know. This object will be created as My Company 3. Okay, so I'll hit OK on that. I'm good with that. And notice what it does is it generates a script. Creates schema instead of create database. That's fine. When they generate a script, they'll very often put quotes around things, but you don't need to do that, right? So we didn't do it when we wrote ours. Default character set, UTF-8, collate, so it's the exact same script we wrote manually, and that's what I want you to be able to do, is to write these scripts manually and not use the GUI interface. I'm going to go ahead and hit cancel on this. So I think that fairly well covers how to create a database.